The forbidden forest loomed ahead, its towering trees twisted and gnarled, shrouded in perpetual fog that clung to the ground like a mourning veil. Vesper Nightshade stood at the forest's edge, her breath visible in the chill of the air, the weight of her oath pressing on her shoulders. She had been chosen as the Riftwalker, a protector of the balance between worlds, a guardian tasked with sealing the rifts that threatened to spill untold horrors into the realm of the living. The forest whispered secrets she could not yet understand, and every step forward felt like a silent dare from the ancient woods. Vesper's dark cloak, embroidered with runes of protection, flowed behind her, a stark contrast against the bleak, misty landscape. The rift ahead pulsed with an eerie blue light, an unearthly glow that seemed to beckon her closer. Ravenna Frost, Vesper's closest ally and the only other person she could trust in this forsaken place, moved silently beside her. Ravenna's presence was a comfort. Her sharp, calculating eyes missed nothing, and her knowledge of the forest's many dangers was unparalleled. She was the one who had first shown Vesper the way into the forbidden forest, the one who had trained her in the art of sealing the rifts. Together, they had faced countless threats, their bond forged in the heat of battle and the cold, unforgiving darkness of the woods. But something in Ravenna's demeanor had shifted recently, a quiet tension that Vesper couldn't quite place. A glance exchanged between them carried unspoken doubts, as if the forest's heavy gloom was slowly seeping into their hearts. As they ventured deeper, the forest seemed to come alive, branches twisting and curling like skeletal fingers reaching for them. Vesper's senses were on high alert. Every rustle of leaves and distant howl felt like a warning. The ground beneath them was littered with the remnants of past travelers, broken weapons, torn cloaks, and footprints that faded into nothing. The path to the first rift was fraught with dangers, yet Vesper felt an inexplicable pull toward it, as if something within the forest was calling her name. She tightened her grip on her dagger, the blade gleaming with enchanted runes that glowed faintly in the dim light. Ravenna led the way, her movements swift and sure, but her silence was unsettling. Vesper could feel the weight of their task, and for the first time, doubt crept into her mind. They arrived at the clearing where the rift lay, a gaping wound in reality, pulsating with an unnatural energy that distorted the very air around it. The trees around the rift were blackened and twisted, their bark cracked and bleeding a strange, sap-like substance that glowed faintly. Vesper approached the rift cautiously, her hand outstretched, feeling the pull of its otherworldly power. She began the incantation, words of ancient magic spilling from her lips as the rift flickered and strained against her will. Ravenna stood back, watching intently, her eyes reflecting the eerie light of the rift. But as Vesper's power surged, the rift fought back, and she felt the searing pain of resistance, as if the rift itself was alive and unwilling to be tamed. Vesper's concentration wavered, and in that brief moment she saw something out of the corner of her eye, a flash of movement, a shadow that shouldn't have been there. Her gaze snapped to Ravenna, whose expression was unreadable, her hand resting subtly on the hilt of her own blade. The rift roared in defiance, and Vesper's focus returned just in time to force it closed, the energy dissipating with a blinding flash. Panting, she turned to Ravenna, whose eyes held a strange, distant look. For the first time, Vesper felt a chill that had nothing to do with the forest's cold, as if the darkness surrounding them was more than just the forest. It was a betrayal waiting to unfold. As Vesper and Ravenna pressed deeper into the forest, the atmosphere grew thicker, and the trees seemed to close in around them, their branches intertwining like skeletal hands. The path ahead was treacherous, littered with roots that twisted and coiled, threatening to trip even the most careful traveller. Vesper's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. The rift had closed, but the strange behaviour of her friend lingered in her mind like a bitter taste. Every step felt heavier, as though the forest itself was trying to drag her down. Ravenna led the way, her movements brisk and confident, but there was a tightness in her shoulders that Vesper hadn't noticed before, a stiffness that suggested she was keeping something hidden. The deeper they ventured, the more erratic the forest became. Vesper could feel the magic in the air, wild, untamed, and ancient. Strange whispers echoed through the trees, carried on the wind like half-forgotten secrets. Shadows flickered in the corners of her vision, vanishing the moment she turned her head. Vesper's pulse quickened as they approached a small glade where a group of twisted statues stood in eerie silence. Each statue depicted a different figure, their faces frozen in expressions of fear, anger, or sorrow. Vesper recognized them as past Riftwalkers, guardians who had failed in their duty and paid the ultimate price. Ravenna paused, her gaze lingering on the statues for a moment longer than necessary, her expression unreadable. "They never tell you about the ones who didn't make it," Ravenna said quietly, her voice carrying a weight of bitterness. Vesper glanced at her, sensing a deep resentment that hadn't been there before. She had always seen Ravenna as strong, unshakable, a mentor who had guided her through the darkest trials. But now, in the shadow of the statues, Vesper saw something she hadn't seen before: doubt. "We're just tools to them," Ravenna continued, her tone sharp. "Sacrifices to keep the rifts closed. But who's to say it's worth it?" Vesper wanted to argue, to defend the oath they had both taken, but the words caught in her throat. For the first time, she wondered if Ravenna's disillusionment had roots deeper than she could understand. As they moved on, a sudden tremor shook the ground, and a new rift tore open in their path, its light blazing with a fiery intensity. Vesper and Ravenna leapt back as a monstrous figure began to emerge, a hulking creature with jagged, crystalline skin that reflected the forest's dark hues. Vesper drew her dagger, the runes along its edge glowing with a soft blue light, ready to face the beast. But before she could attack, Ravenna stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the creature with a look of recognition. "Stay back," Ravenna warned, her voice edged with a command that left no room for argument. Vesper hesitated, watching as Ravenna raised her hand and the creature halted, as if bound by some unseen force. Vesper's heart pounded as she watched Ravenna's strange interaction with the rift beast. The realization hit her like a cold wave. Ravenna had known this would happen. The creature, the rift, the statues. Everything had been part of a larger plan. Vesper's grip tightened on her dagger, and she felt the sting of betrayal as Ravenna turned to her, a faint smirk playing on her lips. "You were never meant to be the hero, Vesper," Ravenna said, her tone laced with a bitter truth. "You were meant to be the sacrifice." The words cut deep, and Vesper felt the forest's dark magic coil around her, suffocating the last remnants of trust she had left. The forest around them seemed to pulse with a dark energy, the trees groaning as if alive with pain and anger. Vesper's mind raced as she pieced together the fragments of Ravenna's deception. Every whispered secret, every guiding hand, had been part of an elaborate scheme to lead her here, not to seal the rifts, but to become their key. The crystalline beast loomed behind Ravenna, its jagged form shimmering with otherworldly light, and Vesper could see now that it was no random monster but a guardian bound to Ravenna's will. The realization sent a wave of nausea through her, a sickening twist of betrayal and disbelief. She had trusted Ravenna with her life, and now she was nothing more than a pawn in a game she hadn't even known she was playing. Ravenna stepped closer, her expression cold and resolute. "This forest is dying, Vesper. The rifts are its last breath, its only chance to reclaim the power that was stolen from it centuries ago." Her voice was filled with a strange fervour, as if she truly believed in the twisted cause she now served. "You were always meant to be the final piece, the sacrifice that would seal the rifts forever and restore the forest's ancient power." Vesper staggered back, her heart pounding as Ravenna's words sank in. This wasn't just about the rifts. It was about control, power, and the lengths Ravenna would go to achieve it. The bond they had shared was nothing but a lie. And now, Standing before the rift and its monstrous guardian, Vesper realized she was alone. The forest itself seemed to react to Ravenna's declaration, the ground trembling as vines and roots twisted toward Vesper like serpents. She dodged, narrowly avoiding the grasping tendrils, her mind scrambling for a way out. Every instinct told her to fight, but the weight of Ravenna's betrayal and the power of the rift beast made her hesitate. Ravenna raised her hand, and the creature lunged, its crystalline form cutting through the air with deadly precision. Vesper threw herself to the side, rolling to her feet just in time to see the beast's claws gouge deep furrows into the earth where she had stood. The battle had begun, and Vesper knew that she was fighting not just for her life, but for the very soul of the forest. As Vesper fought, the forest came alive in a nightmarish dance of shadows and light. She moved with the grace and fury of a cornered predator, her dagger flashing as she deflected the creature's attacks. But with each clash, she could feel the rift's power growing, feeding off the conflict and drawing energy from the forest itself. Vesper's magic was strong, but the rift beast was relentless, a manifestation of the forest's desperation and Ravenna's ambition. Ravenna watched with a cold, calculating gaze, her hand still poised as if she could end the fight at any moment. But she didn't. She was testing Vesper, pushing her to her limits, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. In a final, desperate move, Vesper channeled all her remaining strength into a single, powerful spell. The runes on her dagger blazed with a brilliant blue light, and she drove the blade deep into the ground, sending a shockwave of magic through the forest. The rift beast staggered, its crystalline body cracking and splintering as Vesper's magic tore through it. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed as though she had won. But then Ravenna stepped forward, her expression one of cold triumph. "You've done well, Vesper," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "But this was never your fight to win." With a flick of her wrist, Ravenna summoned the rift's power, and the beast reformed, stronger and more terrible than before. Vesper's heart sank as she realized the truth. Ravenna had already sealed her fate. The air was thick with the lingering echoes of magic, and the ground still trembled beneath Vesper's feet as the last remnants of her spell faded into the forest. The rift beast, now a shattered mass of reflective shards, lay scattered across the clearing, its once menacing form reduced to fragments. Vesper staggered back, her breath ragged, the weight of her actions settling heavily on her shoulders. The forest around them was eerily still, as if holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. Vesper's gaze shifted to Ravenna, who stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the broken creature with a mix of frustration and unspoken emotion. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was louder than any words could be. "It wasn't supposed to be this way," Ravenna finally said, her voice breaking the oppressive stillness. Vesper could hear the strain, the cracks in the facade that Ravenna had so carefully maintained. But there was no room for sympathy now. Not after everything. Vesper's hands clenched around her dagger, its glow dimming as the magic faded, leaving only the cold, unyielding metal. "You lied to me," Vesper said, her voice low but firm. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound, and each word felt like it carried the weight of their shared past. Ravenna turned to face her, and for the first time, Vesper saw the flicker of doubt in her mentor's eyes, a glimpse of the person she had once trusted. The forest began to stir, responding to the energy of the rift and the shattered creature. The twisted trees seemed to shift, their branches reaching toward the fallen shards as if drawn to the remnants of the rift's power. Vesper watched in horror as the pieces of the creature began to move, slowly reassembling under the forest's influence. It was not the rift beast it had been before. Now it was a broken, haunted version of itself, barely held together by the forest's desperate magic. The sight was a chilling reminder that the battle was far from over, and that Ravenna's actions had set in motion something far beyond their control. Vesper turned her attention back to Ravenna, whose expression had hardened once more. The forest needs a guardian, Vesper. Someone who understands its pain, its loss, Ravenna said, her tone cold and unyielding. You could never understand what it's like to feel that kind of power slipping away. Vesper shook her head, the reality of the situation settling in. The rifts weren't just random anomalies. They were the forest's way of clawing back the power it had lost, a cycle that Ravenna had been feeding into all along. Vesper felt the sting of tears, not from sadness, but from the sheer weight of betrayal. This wasn't about saving the forest. It was about control, about Ravenna's twisted vision of what it meant to be a protector. In that moment, Vesper knew what she had to do. The rifts needed to be sealed, not just closed temporarily, but truly bound so they could no longer threaten their world. But to do that, she would have to confront Ravenna one last time, to end the cycle of manipulation and lies that had brought them both to this point. The forest around them continued to shift, its energy volatile and unpredictable, and Vesper realized that the final battle was no longer against the rift beast or even the forest's magic. It was against Ravenna's corrupted will. As she took a step forward, Vesper braced herself for the fight that would determine not just her fate, but the fate of the forbidden forest itself. The forest was alive with magic, the air humming with an unnatural energy as Vesper and Ravenna faced each other for the final time. The broken creature, now reassembled in a twisted and incomplete form, loomed ominously between them, a grotesque symbol of the damage that had been done. Vesper's heart pounded as she gripped her dagger, its faint glow a reminder of the power she still wielded. But this fight was different. This was not just a battle of magic, but a reckoning of trust and betrayal. The forest's energy coiled around them like a living thing, feeding on their conflict, and Vesper knew that only one of them would leave this place unchanged. "You were always so naive, Vesper," Ravenna sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "You thought this was about protecting the world, about sealing rifts and keeping the balance. But the truth is, power doesn't care about balance. It cares about survival." Ravenna's words stung, but they also steeled Vesper's resolve. She had been manipulated, lied to, and used as a pawn in a twisted game of control, but she still had the strength to fight back. With a surge of defiance, Vesper raised her dagger, the runes blazing with renewed light. Ravenna's expression shifted, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face as Vesper stepped forward, determined to end the cycle once and for all. The forest responded violently, roots and vines lashing out as if trying to protect Ravenna from Vesper's advance. But Vesper moved with purpose, her magic cutting through the forest's defenses with precision and fury. Each strike of her dagger sent shockwaves of power rippling through the clearing, and the twisted creature stumbled, its form struggling to hold together. Ravenna's calm demeanor faltered, replaced by a mix of anger and desperation. "You don't understand what you're doing!" she shouted, her voice tinged with fear. But Vesper's focus was unwavering. She would not be swayed by Ravenna's lies any longer. She would end this, not just for herself, but for all who had been betrayed by the forest's false promises. With one final powerful incantation, Vesper drove her dagger deep into the ground, unleashing a torrent of magic that tore through the forest like a storm. The rift beast shattered once more, this time for good, its shards dissolving into nothingness as the magic that held it together was stripped away. Ravenna fell to her knees, the force of Vesper's spell breaking her connection to the forest's power. The air grew still, the forest's restless energy fading into silence. Vesper stood over Ravenna, her dagger still glowing faintly, a symbol of the strength she had reclaimed. "It's over," Vesper said, her voice calm but resolute. "The rifts will be sealed, and this forest will no longer prey on the living." Ravenna looked up, her expression a mix of defeat and bitterness. For a moment, Vesper saw a glimpse of the person she had once admired, a guardian who had lost her way. But there would be no redemption here, no forgiveness for the betrayal that had nearly destroyed them all. Vesper turned away, the forest parting before her as she walked toward the final rift. With one last, determined effort, she sealed it shut, the crack in reality mending under the force of her will. The forbidden forest fell quiet, its twisted magic finally subdued. Vesper left the clearing with a heavy heart, knowing that her journey had changed her forever. The rifts were closed, but the scars of betrayal would linger, a reminder of the price of power and the dangers of trusting the wrong person.